So you want to own an F-35 Squadron. You have seen the air shows. You have seen the flyovers. The Pentagon's own auditors put a number on this program that is almost impossible to picture. $2.1 trillion, spent from 1994 to the year 2088. Not one fighter jet, an entire 94-year commitment. Here is what that number actually buys, and what it actually costs. One F-35A, the standard Air Force variant, has a flyaway cost of roughly $82.5 million for recent production lots, and that figure excludes the engine entirely. Add the engine back in, as most later contracts now quote it, and the per-jet price climbs to around $97 million, still before any of the systems that make it combat-ready. Turn that flyaway jet into something a country can actually fly into a real mission, and the number climbs fast. Add the engine, training systems, spare parts, and mission software, and a fully combat-ready F-35A typically lands between $95 million and $120 million before a single hour has been flown. The Air Force is not the only customer. The Marine Corps flies the F-35B, a short takeoff, vertical landing version built around a lift fan instead of extra fuel tanks, and it costs roughly $109 million per jet, the most expensive of the three variants, and the one that sacrifices the most performance to gain that vertical landing trick. The Navy flies the F-35C, built with a bigger wing, reinforced landing gear, and a tailhook for catapult launches off a carrier deck. It costs around $102 million per jet, cheaper than the B, more expensive than the A, and the version that turns an aircraft carrier's flight deck into a stealth fighter base. 3 different jets, 3 different price tags, 1 program name. That alone should tell you the F-35 was never really a fighter jet. It is 3 different aircraft wearing the same marketing. Now multiply any of those unit prices by the actual size of the buy. The United States alone plans to purchase around 2,470 F-35s across all 3 services, and more than 20 other countries have bought in as partners or customers. Total planned production across the whole program is expected to exceed 3,000 aircraft. That is where the sticker price stops mattering and the sustainment bill takes over. The Pentagon's own 2023 cost estimate put total program sustainment, fuel, maintenance, spare parts, upgrades over the aircraft's entire service life at nearly $1.6 trillion. That is a 44% jump from the $1.1 trillion sustainment estimate made just 5 years earlier. Add roughly $442 billion in acquisition costs, the actual purchase of the jets, development, and testing, and you land on that headline number, $2.1 trillion total program cost through the year 2088.
About half of that increase is simply inflation compounding across a program the Pentagon is now committed to running for nearly a century. The original target for keeping one F-35 flying for a year was $4.1 million in sustainment costs. The current estimate is $6.6 million per aircraft per year, a number that keeps climbing every time the program office revises its own math. Part of that sustainment bill is baked directly into the airframe. Unlike the F-22, which needed a special coating sprayed on top of its skin, the F-35 built its stealth properties directly into the structural material itself, a genuine engineering improvement that reduced day-to-day upkeep compared to earlier stealth jets. Genuine improvement does not mean cheap. The F-35 still requires roughly 160% more maintenance labor hours per flight hour than the F-16 it was supposed to replace. And real damage to the aircraft's skin is not something a base-level mechanic can simply patch.
Restoring the stealth properties after real damage means rebuilding the exact physical contour and the exact electromagnetic behavior of that section of the aircraft, validated against precision specifications that only Lockheed Martin controls. Operators can do routine field-level work themselves. Anything more serious requires the manufacturer's approval, the manufacturer's materials, and the manufacturer's engineers. That detail matters more than it sounds. Buying an F-35 does not just mean buying an airplane. It means buying a permanent dependency on one American company for the parts, the software, and the specialized repair processes that keep the jet's most important feature, its stealth actually working. Flying the thing, even without any repairs, is its own separate expense. 1 hour of F-35A flight time costs between $34,000 and $42,000 in 2026, well above the Pentagon's own target of $25,000 an hour.
Every training sortie, every combat mission, every routine patrol runs that meter regardless of whether a single weapon is ever fired. That gap between target and reality is not new. The program has spent over a decade trying to close it, and the fix has a name: ODIN, a replacement for the jet's original maintenance software, expected to shave roughly $10,000 off the per-hour cost once it is fully rolled out. ODIN exists because its predecessor, a system called Alice, became one of the most infamous failures in the program's history. Alice was supposed to predict maintenance needs and streamline supply chains across the entire global fleet. Instead, it became notorious for bad data, false alerts, and diagnostics maintainers learned to root around rather than trust. The Pentagon announced it was scrapping ALIS for ODIN back in early 2020, promising the new system would be fully operational by the end of 2022.
It is 2026, and the transition is still not finished. A 4-year delay, and counting, on a piece of software meant to make the world's most expensive fighter jet cheaper to keep flying. None of this software trouble is abstract. It shows up directly in whether the jets can fly at all. The F-35 fleet has hovered around 55 to 65% mission capable in recent years, well below the Pentagon's own 80% target for its fighter fleets. Mission capable is the generous number. The Pentagon's own testing office reported the fleet's full mission-capable rate, meaning every system aboard the jet actually works, not just enough of them to call it flyable, at just 30% in 2023. Roughly 1 in 3 F-35s in the entire fleet was fully ready for combat on any given day. That statistic sits uncomfortably next to the sticker price. A country can spend $100 million on a single aircraft and still only expect it to be fully mission-capable less than a third of the time, once maintenance backlogs, parts shortages, and software quirks are factored into the real-world math. The software problems did not stay contained to maintenance either. The jet's next major capability upgrade, known as Block 4, is now more than $6 billion over its original cost estimate, and the completion date has slipped 5 full years, from an original target to a new one of 2031 at the earliest. The specific piece of hardware and software holding that upgrade back is called TR-3, a $1.9 billion package that Lockheed Martin is delivering roughly 3 years behind its own original schedule. Every late TR-3 shipment has meant late aircraft deliveries stacking up behind it. Jets sitting finished on the tarmac, waiting for the electronics that make them worth flying. Congress got frustrated enough with the repeated slips that it ordered the program office to split Block 4 and TR-3 into their own separately tracked subprogram. In 2023, specifically to force tighter oversight, after years of the Pentagon absorbing cost growth with no consequence. The upgrade package has also shrunk along the way. The Pentagon now expects Block 4 to deliver fewer capabilities than it originally promised, at a higher price than it originally quoted. Building the jets fast enough to meet demand is its own separate constraint, entirely apart from the software. Lockheed Martin's Fort Worth, Texas plant delivered a record 191 F-35s in 2025, and the company says it can sustain a stable production rate above 156 jets a year, roughly 5 times faster than any other Allied fighter currently in production anywhere on Earth. Even at that pace, the program has struggled to keep up with orders. As of early 2026, the Pentagon's own figures showed a backlog of more than 400 jets already paid for and waiting on the production line, a queue that keeps growing every time a new export deal gets signed. Not every country that wanted in got to stay in. Turkey ordered up to 100 F-35s and had already begun manufacturing parts for the global supply chain when it also bought a Russian S-400 air defense system in 2019, a system the Pentagon considered an unacceptable intelligence risk sitting next to a stealth fighter. The United States formally expelled Turkey from the program that same year. Turkey had already paid roughly $1.4 billion toward its jets and lost an estimated $12 billion in future manufacturing contracts for its own defense industry. Removing Turkey from the supply chain cost the Pentagon itself an extra $500 to $600 million just to reroute the parts contracts Turkish companies had been building.
As of late 2025, Turkey was reportedly still negotiating a possible return to the program, contingent on giving up the very S-400 system that got it expelled in the first place, a costly standoff with no clean resolution for either side. 6 years and counting. Speaking of exports, that is the part of this story that actually works in America's favor. More than 20 countries have bought or committed to buying the F-35, from the United Kingdom and the Netherlands to Japan, South Korea, and Norway, which became the first partner nation to complete its full planned order of 52 jets. Every one of those foreign sales does two things at once. It spreads the fixed costs of the program across a much larger production run, and it locks each buyer into the same American-controlled software, spare parts pipeline, and upgrade schedule for the life of the aircraft. Selling the plane is also selling the leash, the same leash that snapped shut on Turkey the moment it looked elsewhere for its air defenses. None of this has stopped the jet from actually fighting. Israel became the first country to fly the F-35 in combat back in 2018, and its fleet has flown strikes across Gaza, Lebanon, Yemen, and Iran since October 2023, including the first time an F-35 has ever been credited with shooting down another crewed aircraft. In March 2025, Israeli F-35s flew the type's first missions in beast mode, external weapons hung under the wings instead of tucked inside the stealth-optimized internal bays, trading radar invisibility for raw firepower when the mission called for it. By 2025, all 4 operational F-35 variants had made their combat debut somewhere in the Middle East, most recently U.S. Marine Corps F-35Cs striking Houthi weapons storage sites, and U.S. Air Force F-35As claiming their own first air-to-air kills against Houthi attack drones over Yemen. The jet works. That was never really the argument against it. The argument is what working actually costs, year after year, whether or not a single missile gets fired. Even the spare parts arrive through a system built entirely around dependency. Rather than each country stockpiling its own inventory, the US military services and international partners all draw from one shared global pool of F-35 parts, centrally managed by Lockheed Martin since the participating nations agreed to the arrangement in 2012. No country buys spare parts outright. Instead, each buys access to that shared pool, sized to how many jets it owns and how many hours it plans to fly them, a system explicitly designed to spread cost and risk across all 17 or more nations funding the program at once. In July 2026, the Pentagon signed the largest F-35 spare parts contract in the program's history, worth $1.6 billion, just to keep that global pool stocked. Pooling parts internationally cuts costs.
It also means every F-35 operator on Earth is permanently wired into a single American-controlled supply chain. The same dependency that let Washington cut Turkey off instantly the moment it bought a Russian air defense system. When parts run short, the consequences are not abstract either. GAO auditors found F-35s across the fleet sat grounded for lack of spare parts nearly 30% of the time during one stretch in 2018, before the pooling system had fully matured. Pilots are their own line item, separate from the hardware entirely. Comparable estimates for training a fifth-generation fighter pilot put the figure near $11 million per person, covering years of flight school, simulator time, and live qualification before that pilot is trusted with a real F-35 in a real mission. Lose a trained F-35 pilot to retirement, a better civilian airline offer, or an accident, and the replacement pipeline runs on years, not months.
The jet can be replaced from the Fort Worth production line faster than the person qualified to fly it in combat. Not every F-35 rolls off the same production line either. Beyond Fort Worth, the program runs final assembly and checkout facilities, FACO plants, in Italy and Japan, allowing allied nations to assemble their own jets domestically from American-supplied components, rather than importing a finished aircraft. Italy's FACO line at Cameri builds F-35s not just for its own air force, but for other European customers, and it doubles as a regional depot-level maintenance hub. the kind of facility a country builds specifically so it is not entirely at the mercy of a single American factory's backlog. It is also, not coincidentally, the kind of industrial concession Lockheed Martin uses to make each new export sale politically easier at home for the country writing the check.
What actually justifies flying a jet this expensive, with readiness rates this uneven, is not really the airframe or the stealth coating at all. It is sensor fusion, the F-35's ability to quietly gather radar, infrared, and electronic intelligence from every jet in a formation and stitch it into one shared picture on every pilot's helmet, without anyone needing to use their own radar and give their position away. That capability is the actual product being sold for $100 million a copy. A single F-35 flying alone is an expensive stealth fighter. A squadron of them, networked together and quietly feeding targeting data to ships, ground troops, and other aircraft that were never designed to talk to each other, is closer to a flying intelligence network that happens to also carry weapons. It is also the exact capability a country loses first if Washington ever decided to restrict software support. The standing worry every partner nation has quietly voiced and the Pentagon has just as quietly dismissed, even as the Turkey precedent sits on the record for anyone deciding whether to trust that reassurance. Here is where the story stops being only about America's own bill and becomes about who else is building the same category of aircraft. Because while the F-35 program spent 2 decades fighting software problems and cost overruns, China was building its own answer, and it was not being quiet about it. China's J-20 stealth fighter now costs somewhere between $110 million and $120 million per jet, more expensive than the F-35A, and in the same range as the F-35B. Cost parity is not the story here. Volume is. A July 2026 assessment placed cumulative J-20 deliveries near 500 aircraft produced across 5 active production lines in Chengdu, running an estimated 100 to 120 jets a year. Meanwhile, annual F-35A deliveries to the U.S. Air Force alone have slipped to just 24 to 40 jets a year, slowed by the same technical and cost problems driving up its price. China effectively built a stealth fighter fleet larger than the entire U.S. Air Force F-35A inventory, while America was still arguing internally about software delays and readiness rates. The J-20 was never designed to win a dogfight against an F-35. It was designed to kill the tankers and surveillance aircraft that make the rest of American air power function at all. One advantage America still holds outright. The J-20 has never been offered for export. It flies only for China. The F-35, whatever its problems, is flying in the air forces of more than a dozen allied nations, a strategic asset the sticker price alone does not capture.
The Pentagon's answer to all of this has already been named and funded. The F-47, built by Boeing under the Next Generation Air Dominance program, is meant to replace the aging F-22 as America's next air superiority fighter, and it is being built with the F-35's cost lessons in mind, or at least that is the pitch. Boeing's contract is worth $20 billion for a planned fleet of 185 F-47s at a projected unit cost around $300 million each, roughly 3 times the price of an F-35A. The Air Force says the aircraft will fly over 1,000 miles and exceed Mach 2, entering service by the end of the decade, with first flight targeted for 2028. $300 million is not a typo, and it is not an outlier either. It is the honest price of staying one generation ahead in a contest where the other side has already shown it can outproduce you on quantity, even when it cannot outproduce you on unit cost. Compare that to the F-22 Raptor the F-47 is meant to replace. Production stopped at just 187 jets back in 2011, after Congress decided the aircraft was too expensive to keep buying, even by fighter jet standards, and no F-22 has ever been sold to a single foreign ally. The F-35 program was explicitly built to avoid repeating that mistake. Sell enough copies to enough allies that the per-unit cost keeps falling, instead of following the Raptor's path to an early, expensive dead end. By that specific measure, the F-35 succeeded. Unit flyaway costs have genuinely fallen since the program's early years, and the sheer number of partner nations is the reason the price did not simply keep climbing the way the Raptors did. It just turned out that falling faster on the hardware line item did nothing to stop the sustainment bill, the software, and the readiness numbers from climbing anyway. This is the real economics of owning an F-35 Squadron in 2026.
The flyaway price is the smallest number in the entire story. Sustainment costs alone will run nearly 4 times higher than the original purchase price of every jet ever built, stretched out over a commitment that runs to the year 2088. The software meant to make the jet cheaper to maintain arrived 4 years late and is still not finished. The next major upgrade is $6 billion over budget and 5 years behind schedule. The readiness rate on a $100 million aircraft sits closer to 1 in 3 fully mission-capable than the 4 in 5 the Pentagon originally promised itself. And the country racing to match it did not need to solve any of those problems to build 500 stealth fighters of its own. It simply built factories, ran them at full capacity, and let volume do what elegant engineering could not. You are not just buying a fighter jet. You are buying a 94-year subscription to software updates, spare parts, and sustainment contracts that cost more than the plane itself, while betting that the next generation, at 3 times the price, arrives before the volume on the other side of the world makes the bet moot. That bet is already being placed, in Fort Worth and in Chengdu, on production lines running at very different speeds, for very different prices, toward the exact same goal. Whoever controls the sky first, for the rest of this century, gets to decide what everyone else's Air Force is allowed to cost.